Carol, welcome to Alive and Well. So grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So I know that you have worked with so many companies and corporations and individuals about this idea of rebalancing, which I want to get into today because I know my people and I know they're listening and being like, I need some of that. But I'm curious about your own rebalancing story. Like, I assume you're so passionate about this work because there's probably a part of it that's quite personal for you. So would you share just a little bit about like maybe that turning point or the aha moment where you kind of had this realization, and then you're like, wait, I could actually teach this also?
Well, the latest rebalancing act was when I got breast cancer at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was out for 3 months. When I left, I didn't know there was a pandemic, so I thought I would go back to the office. And you can imagine leaving. I think it was March 4th, my last day in the office, and then I had surgery March 12th. And then the world changed, and it was just wild going back to work in
Yeah.
such an environment. Of course, I was working in my kitchen, thinking, oh, this won't last too long. And now I've converted a bedroom into an office. Here we are, years and years later.
Yeah.
But it was a wake up call for sure. And I had something earlier that happened that was personal, that was my first part of rebalancing, and that was an unexpected sudden divorce when my kids were teenagers. So that was my first reinvention, because I went from owning my own company and being all over the world with clients to going back to corporate and having this steady stability. Did I just say that? I hope we can edit that part out. Having the stability of a corporate role was important, with kids going off to college soon and things like that. So I did rebalance to enter that job. But the way I worked was always to just put the pedal to the metal and devote great amounts of energy to everything in my path. I am a type A personality through and through. And regardless of whether it was professional or personal, I would go for every pursuit with this relentless energy, because I could, because I knew how to do things. And so I had breast cancer, and I went back to work. And I remember my doctor saying, one of the things that would be really important to prevent recurrence was to keep my stress level pretty low, which I should have known would be the biggest challenge of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But of course, I said, oh, no problem. And I went back to work and adjusted to the pandemic and took on some new responsibilities. And lo and behold, probably 6 to 8 months after I'd come back, there I was again, just burning the candle at both ends in my typical fashion. I had a wonderful friend who was also an employee. We had been to 3 different workplaces together, so she knew me well.
Yeah.
And she kept saying, you're really stressing yourself out again. And remember what the doctor said, you can't be working like that. And I would realize that, but I was just so busy that I think I didn't want to stop. I loved the work I was doing, and it was all very fulfilling. But I was, quite frankly, getting older. I was over 50. I was starting to age, and my body finally just said, enough.
Yeah.
And so the first thing was I went back for a checkup at MD Anderson, where I had my cancer treatment, and found out I had diabetes. I had absolutely no idea. And so that was the first surprise. And so I got that under control, and worked on the health side of things in a reactive way yet again, because I always I
Mm,
always would have my body crying out to me, and that's when I would go, okay, I've got to make a change.
that's right.
And then about a year later, maybe a year and a half, I was traveling all over the place and doing some of my best work. I was so excited, but I went to the doctor for a routine checkup, and I had high blood pressure. And so I told my boss at the time, I said, I think my body is sending me some really strong signals that I just cannot keep up this pace anymore.
Hmm.
And I don't know why it took me so long to wise up. But in the back of my mind, I was starting to think about, okay, what's next? Do I
Yeah.
really want to be doing this corporate grind? I had found love again. I had gotten remarried, had a wonderful life. The kids had gotten through college.
Wow.
A lot can happen in 5 or 6 years. So I had the opportunity to leave the job in early 2023.
Wow.
And it was very interesting because a lot of people who knew me well would say, well, where are you going next? Because they just didn't think I would stay idle for too long.
Hmm.
And I was determined for the first time in my adult life to have that pause, that sabbatical, to just stop and think.
Yeah.
And I was kind of a master of this rebalancing. One thing I've always been is agile.
Mhm.
And so when things need changes, I make the changes. I know how to fix things. So that part was already alive and well, but I think it was the just taking time and the gift of time and being able to think about what really feeds my soul. What
Yeah.
do I want to do? And what do I want my legacy to be? Because if I would have died 10 or 15 years ago, I think at my funeral, people would have talked about how much I got done and how busy I was, and the fact that maybe I was stressed or frazzled and all those classic type A personality traits. But that's not really how I want to be known.
Wow.
And so I decided that rather than jump right back into another job, I would take some time to finally write the book. The book was in the back of my mind for a long time, but it moved to the front. And I enlisted the help of my dear childhood friend who is a ghostwriter, and she helped me tell my story. But I knew I needed to talk to other people because, yes, I know what's worked for me and what hasn't worked, and the lessons I've learned the hard way. But I wanted to hear how others had done it. So I interviewed over 70 women and some men in there too, and told their stories. And I realized it wasn't just me. It is such a common problem, especially in high achieving, ambitious women.
Yeah.
And we manage it differently than men do. That's another thing that I know to be true.
Hmm.
And so we feel this sense like we need to be doing more, that we're not doing enough,
Mhm.
and guilt when we don't do it.
Yeah.
And so learning to let go of that and learning from other women, and then being able to tell that story, that has just become a real passion. Because the other thing I learned in talking to other women is that it didn't matter if they were 23 or 73, the struggles were still the same.
Oh, yep.
And younger women are going through the same things I went through, especially working mothers.
Yep.
And then you add the impact of social media on top of that. And it's like, don't wait for your body to tell you you've got to stop like I did. So I'm on a mission now to help people rebalance. And I think balance, the word balance is a little bit of a myth.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you balance things, things change. So it's about that agility and that resilience and how you keep your legacy in mind so that you can do the right things and let go of the other things.
Wow. Wow. What a story. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm sure there are parts of your story that everyone listening was just kind of nodding along, right? That they can relate. And I certainly can. You guys listening, you probably know my story, but running my own law practice and then having two babies back to back and thinking that I could just like pick up because it's my practice. And like, if I have to
Sure.
nurse while I'm, negotiating the settlement,
Yes.
I can do that. It's not a big deal. And I think I ignored mental and emotional symptoms that my body, it was coming, right, for a long time, and pushed through because we're good at that, until, similar to you, my body was just like, enough. I'm shutting her down because you're not paying attention. And I think that was probably a rebalancing moment for me of like, what does it actually look like to be a working mom?
Yeah.
And a big thing for me in that season was starting to accept and appreciate my own limits, because I think I was in denial of those limits for a long
Yes.
time.
Yes.
And then we were just talking about it before we hit record, but a year ago, we sold our house in Miami and packed everything up and moved to Houston with no jobs and not knowing anyone and no family or anything, because we just felt like God was calling us to rethink everything. Like, that's the phrase we just kept getting, like, rethink everything. So I'm like, okay, like we're going to wind down the law firm and leave what we know in Miami and move. And, our kids are doing a different type of schooling now and all of this stuff. And about 6 months ago, I was able to actually close the law practice altogether
Good for
and
you.
do a huge shift. Yeah. But what I noticed and kind of what I want to talk to you about is that I did not realize how much of my identity was wrapped up in the work that I did and how hard I worked, and that I was such a go-getter and I could be counted on to do all the things. And my ego just loved when everyone was like, man, how do you do it all? Like, you do so much. And I had to really work through and unravel all of that and be like, if I'm not Michelle, the attorney, like, who am I? Right? If I'm not.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear even a little bit of, like, before we get into maybe some of the practical stuff about rebalancing that you teach, like, what's the mindset part behind it? Because I'm sure you had to reevaluate a lot of, priorities and values each time you kind of rebalanced. Can you teach us a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, I want to say I love that you listened to where you thought God was calling you, because that, I believe, is a huge part of it. That's a huge part of it for me. I had the good fortune in my 20s. I worked for Exxon, one of the largest companies. Of course, I'm here in Houston. That's not a surprise. They are the biggest employer.
Yeah.
And we went through a class that was called Increasing Human Effectiveness. And I had the opportunity to decide on my uppermost values. And so for me, ever since my 20s, it's been faith, family, serenity, health, and contribution.
Whoa.
And sometimes those fight against each other.
Yep.
Because contribution is all about the job, but serenity is knowing which battles to fight and which ones to let go. And then family was way up there, but the job could take over in a hurry. And then, of course, health was always what suffered, because I would give everything to everybody else and had nothing left for myself. So one of the things, and this goes back to what I was saying before about the first wake up call, which for me was the sudden divorce.
Yeah.
And so I found out my husband was having an affair. I asked him to leave. I believe it was the Holy Spirit helping me. It's a long story and it's in my book, but I had a dream that he was having an affair.
Wow.
And I was able to calmly work through the situation. It wasn't easy. It had been bad for a while, but I was just, I think, just not dealing with it.
Sure.
And kept hoping it would get better through some magical act or something. But through that season, when everything changed, kind of like you, I had my own company. I'd had it for, at the time, 16 years, and I ended up selling it. I went to work for that company, and then I went back into the corporate world after that for a larger company. But I had to really focus on three things, and they were surrender, and then they still are. Yeah. Surrender, trust, and faith.
Come on.
Wow. And surrender is letting go of our own plans. Yeah. Why is it that we think we are so good at making all the right plans? Because we learn over time that plans rarely go the way we expect them to. Yeah. And if we can be open to bigger purpose, bigger plans that maybe we wouldn't have expected, and we take that road less traveled, some wonderful, wonderful things can happen. But the older I've gotten, the more wisdom I've gained, the more I'm able to let go of my own plans. Yeah. And then trust. Trust is everything from trusting others, trusting that the path ahead will be better if you keep moving forward, even if you don't know where the path is leading, because you've surrendered. Yep. So it's trusting in those things, trusting in the people who care about you, knowing who you can trust and leaning into that. But it's also trusting in your own abilities. It's trusting in the fact that you may not know what's going to happen 5 years down the road, but you know how to get through this next moment. Yeah. And just hanging on to that when you're at your low points. Yeah. And then the last one, faith. I'm a Christian. That's my faith. I rely a lot on that. Yeah. And I don't, I have friends and colleagues who are all kinds of different faiths. But I think what's really significant is believing in something larger than yourself. Yeah. Because we're one small part in this great big world, and knowing that there's something larger out there than just us keeps you in check. It helps you to avoid getting so caught up in your own thoughts and in your own um, self,
Yeah.
so that you can have that better perspective. And so for me, I mean, I know as sure as I'm sitting here talking to you that the Lord has brought good from bad times, that wonderful, amazing blessings were there for me,
Yes.
even though I couldn't see it at the time.
Wow.
And so those things, surrender, trust, and faith, those are really the keys to the mindset that's gotten me through the tough times and enabled me to find fulfillment in the everyday, the quiet moments, the blessings of my life. You know, it's great to have those mountaintop moments, but what does life look for like for you every day?
Yeah.
And how is that moving you toward your legacy that you're trying to create? And what I'd want people to say at my funeral versus what they might have said about, you know, that busyness, like you and I think both shared that, oh, she gets so much done.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
wonderful to get things done, but is that really where my significance comes from? It's not. It's
No.
not.
Oh,
So,
that's so good. And I feel like that's been just a personal prayer of mine lately too, is like, give me eternal perspective. Like, let me not get so stuck in this minutia. And when I do experience that surrender or the serenity that comes with it, it's so fascinating because it's both humbling and empowering at the same time, right?
isn't
It's like,
it?
whoa, it's actually so much bigger than me. And it's actually not all up to me at the same time,
Yes,
right? It's so
exactly.
good. Yeah. Um, you brought to mind another thing too that just even my girls are 7 and 8, so they're little, but
Oh,
we have a family motto, I guess, or saying, but we say it all the time. And it's been so helpful in the last year, especially with all the transition. And like you said, things not going how we thought they would and having plans and the Lord just being like, ha ha, like you had
yeah,
the illusion of control, but you were never really in control of that.
yeah.
And we say it all the time and we say, only good things happen to the grocers.
Oh,
And
I
it's
love
because,
it.
yeah, we believe that, right? There's a God that works all things for good for those who love
Mhm.
him. So even though it doesn't feel like good or fun or comfortable or all the things
Mhm.
that we might prefer, we really do trust, right? That it'll all work out for the greatest good.
Yes,
And sometimes that's not even my greatest good, it's the greatest good.
right. Excellent.
So I love you bringing that up, and I think it's so important. Okay, so for people listening who have been through seasons, um, some big life shifts, or maybe they're just like in a place right now where it's like, man, I just keep feeling like I'm trying to put a square peg in a round hole, like it doesn't fit anymore and I'm exhausted and I'm not even really enjoying the work. Or maybe it's something like we experience where my body is just like, I know I can't keep going like this.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of walk us through, if you would, the rebalancing process or framework. Like, where do we even start? I guess you started with the values and priorities, but like, tell me a little bit
Mhm.
more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to begin with the end in mind, to
Okay.
borrow a phrase from Stephen Covey. And so I mentioned those values that I learned about earlier in life. And so they did guide me. I sound like I never made a good decision in my career. And I will say I did make some good decisions because I was in a very fast paced, upwardly mobile role in leadership development in Exxon. And I chose to step off that track because I knew I wanted to be present for my kids
Yeah.
and I was traveling all the time. So I always was having to make those trade offs, even in the early days of becoming a working mother. And that's why I started my company. But I think that okay, tell me the question again. I'm sorry, I'm getting off track because now I'm 56 and I get menopause brain. So sad.
Every mom just nodding
So
along. I'm
sad.
like, yeah, it happens.
Yeah. You
Um,
were asking me about people in those seasons
yeah. And maybe just
and where
starting
it
with like,
starts.
yeah.
So I was constantly making those decisions, but they were based on my values.
Okay.
And so I think you have to start with defining your uppermost values.
Okay.
And further to that, what is the legacy that you want to leave? What do you want people to say about you when you're finished in this job or in this season of life or in this world?
Yeah.
What do you want to be known for?
Yeah.
And the reason I like to start with that and just think through that is that I think it's important to know what you do uniquely well and
Mm.
what you're meant to do on this earth versus just doing all the things you can do. It's like I said at the beginning of the conversation, the very things that help us achieve so much are also the things that can really derail us, because when we give the same amount of energy to everything in our path and we don't discern what's really in alignment
Yeah.
with what we value, what's really going to help us move toward that legacy we want to create,
Mhm.
if we aren't discerning those things, then we're not very good at doing the things that matter. So
Yeah.
I always say it's about focusing on success that matters.
Yeah.
And so we've got to get really good at saying no
Mm.
and deciding what we want to say no to and letting it go without any guilt,
Yeah.
without any second thoughts, and recognizing that we aren't meant to do everything. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. So,
Mhm.
yes, you may be a CPA and you would be the best PTA treasurer. But if you have a full-time job and 5 kids and everything else going on, maybe it's not the right thing for you to say yes to that just because you're capable of it.
Yep.
And maybe you're the best at it. And so about knowing what you're uniquely meant to do
Mhm.
and focusing on that. And so when you stop long enough
Yeah.
just to consider those questions, what are my values and what do I want my legacy to be? Then you can back up from there and say, what do I need to do today? What's one little thing I can do today to help move me toward that and move me away from this feeling of being overwhelmed or burned out or stressed out? Because a lot of times we're spending so much of our time being so filled with things to do, we don't have any margin left for being fulfilled. So
Yeah.
we've got to let some things go. And when you know what you stand for and what's most important, it becomes easier to do that. And I actually have a resource on my website that's just a 45-minute self-directed do on your own exercise. It's a fillable PDF. And so if people want some guidance through that, I can help with that. So
Okay.
it's easy to do. It's taking the time to do it and
Mhm.
really getting centered and focused enough
Yeah.
to get rid of all the distractions
Yeah.
and really think through that I think is a great first step for people who are wondering where to go from here.
That's so good. And I can just see and hear how that brings so much clarity, right? And then it's like, okay, I can move from there. We do a similar process inside of my group program where we identify core values. And what's always so interesting is that people, I think, have a fairly decent idea. Like most women, if we speak to them, they could name off 5 values that are important to them right now, right off the cuff. And then we open up their calendar, and I'll speak for myself, right? Then I open up my calendar and I'm like, whoa, none of those values, or maybe like only 2 of those 5 values are actually protected or even reflected in how I'm actually
Yeah,
spending my time. There's such a disconnect there often. Was that,
it
yeah,
is.
yeah.
And it's funny, I used to do a lot of learning and development with my first company. And I went through an exercise that Zig Ziglar, the late great motivational speaker, did. And he was asking everybody to evaluate their life in 7 different areas. And you could give yourself a 1 to 7 on all these different areas. And it was like vocational, family, spiritual, physical, financial, social. I can't remember the other one. But he said, you may be a 7 in your work life, 7 out of 7. That's the best it can be. But your family life may be suffering.
Yeah.
And if that's one of your values right now is to be the provider for your family, then that's a necessary trade off to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to have the best social life, you're not going to probably have the best financial life. If you want to have the best family life, you may not have the best work. You may not be at a 7 on work. But the point is, the answer for you is not to try to be 7s in everything,
Yeah.
because that's burnout.
Yeah.
The answer is to try to be balanced in everything. And maybe it's about being a 5,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's about being, a 6 in a few and a 4 in a few, but it's about trying to balance all the things. And I think that's where we get stuck, is that we feel like we should be a 7 at everything all the time.
Yeah. I think part of that is the myth that we can do it all, or we should be able to do it all, or someone else is doing it all, right? We like see the highlight reel and we're like, well, they can manage all of these different things.
Yes. And I do not like the word um, have it all or
Yeah.
be it all or do it all. And I was looking back at some of the research on that. And I think that was first getting blown out of the water in the 70s, which is funny. You know,
Yeah.
you would think by now we would know better. But as we gain awareness in one aspect of life, things change. And I can't underestimate,
Yeah.
well, no, I can't overestimate the impact of social media and all this, because I speak to audiences now and I have moms with young kids who say that people, and I hesitate to put this example out there, but there are people who will post on Instagram their children's gourmet lunches with the most amazing entree and side dishes and, you know, veggies cut into the cutest little shapes, and they post about it. And so the reason I hesitate to say anything is that if that is your unique gift and you love doing it and it brings you joy and it brings your children joy, I don't want to say don't do it.
Sure.
Do the crafts, put the elf on the shelf at Christmas time and go to town. But if that's not your uppermost value, let it go. Like, why do we think when we see these things, we all automatically say, oh my gosh, if I don't have a lunch like that for my child, she's never going to forgive me, and she'll be the one that everybody makes fun of because I only put a Lunchable in her lunch, or, you know, whatever narrative we tell ourselves. The big joke, and I can say this because my kids are now 25 and 27, they don't remember that stuff.
Yeah.
They don't. I asked my kids a few years ago when they were in their 20s, I said, I want you to be really honest with me. I said, do you feel like when you were growing up that my job was more important than you? Did you ever feel like I sacrificed being a good parent
Wow.
to be a good employee?
What a brave question to ask.
And I asked them independently. They didn't hear the others' answers, but they both said no.
Wow.
And you know what? I missed some of their programs. I missed some things,
Yeah.
but I was there for most of it.
Yeah.
And I was there for what counted.
Mm-hmm.
And I prioritized them every chance I got, which is part of the reason I didn't have a lot of energy left for myself.
Wow.
And I probably should have done a little bit less in the work realm looking back,
Mm-hmm.
because I was constantly trying to be there for them, but I wasn't always there. And I didn't pack the gourmet lunches, and I didn't make cookies for all the teachers. Sorry, teachers. I made them sometimes, but usually mine would be the gift cards, the store-bought gifts. I'd be the good, you know, mom giving somebody else cash if they could go get the gift. There were times I made those trade-offs, but they weren't looking at me like, Mom, why didn't you make the cookies for the coach?
Mm-mm.
The big things are what matters. And in the grand scheme of things, they're not going to care if they had the most gourmet lunch. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't
So,
either. Wow. That's so good. So just hear that, right? Like all of you listening, let that be a good reminder that every yes we say to something is a no to something else. And what we think we need to do to show up as a good mom, wife, employer, employee, whatever, is usually skewed. Like our perspective is just skewed because we're in it. So I think this offers such a good reframe for us and gives us so much permission to just, yes, be in alignment with our values, and just exhale and do the best we can, whatever
the
that looks.
best we can,
Yeah.
given our awareness right now, do the best we can.
Yeah.
That's all anybody would ever ask.
Yep. And I think the truth is that when we strip away all of those shoulds in comparison, it's what we're doing. Like, I know we're all just doing the best we can with the resources and the attention and the
Right.
sleep and the bandwidth and all the things that we have.
Yeah.
So good. Okay. So we start with bigger picture. We're getting clarity on the things that are actually important to us. We're talking about the myth, or busting the myth that we can do it all or we should do it all. What's kind of next in this rebalancing framework?
Well, I do suggest that people have goals, lifetime goals.
Love that.
And I think that also helped me. It was in the same exercise back in my 20s that I did the values exercise, same
Okay.
class. And so I think when you have goals, you know where you're aiming. And then you can have lifetime goals, but then you need to break those into 5-year plans. So a lot of things might be your goals, but they're not your goals right now. So, what are your goals over the next 5 years? And then, what are one or two things you want to work on right now? And that can be really small goals. I mean, don't try, we used to always say at work, don't try to boil the ocean.
Wow.
So, just pick one or two things that you can do. Maybe it's working in a workout a couple of times a week. Maybe it's cooking at home. Maybe it's, here's a little hack that I learned. My daughter loves to cook.
Hmm.
And so I paid her allowance to cook a few of our meals every week when I had a lot going on at work so that we could eat at home.
That's awesome.
So enlist help. Maybe that's one of your goals. But
Yeah.
it's just backing everything up from the big picture to the what are a couple things I can do right now.
Wow.
I think that's how you get started. And then it's just a matter of what's the best next step. And don't get too wrapped up in what's going to happen 10 years down the road if I do this or don't do this today. Just take the best next step.
Yeah. Okay. So there's like a zooming out and then a really zooming in. What are
Mm-hmm.
some examples of lifetime goals for people that are listening that are like, oh my gosh, that sounds so big, or maybe it does
Yeah.
sound overwhelming. What are some common lifetime goals that you hear?
So it could be, I mean, for me, it was having a family.
Mhm.
So I didn't have any kids yet. So that was one of my goals. It could be that you want to have a vacation home. It could be, I mean, it could be just a nice thing that you want to reward yourself with down the road. It could be travel. It could be experiences. It could be things. It could be mindsets.
Okay.
It could be planning so that you have a solid retirement. It could be saying, hey, I want to retire by age 60 and I want to be able to enjoy my grandkids. I want to weigh a certain weight. I want to meet certain fitness goals. I have one friend who did this goal setting exercise with me. We used to work together a long time ago, and she is really into fitness, and she's at the CrossFit World Championships this week.
Whoa.
And so it's kind of cool because when you go through the lifetime goal setting, you don't need to know how you're going to get there.
Okay.
But when you set a goal, your mind starts to open up
Hmm.
and notice the ways that people do get there. And there's a guy named John Goddard, and he's known as like the best goal achiever in America. He set 115 lifetime goals or something like that
Wow.
when he was 15 years old. He's passed away now, but he lived to be, I think, close to 100. But when he was 15, he said he wanted to travel the world. He wanted to visit every continent, and he named a lot of specific countries. Well, that propelled him to have a career with National Geographic, where he would go all over the world. So it really informed his life work. When I was creating this goal list in my 20s, I had a corporate job and had never facilitated a training class, but I knew I wanted to focus on learning and development.
Yeah.
And it led me toward that as my career. I also knew I wanted to be a public speaker.
Hmm.
It's taken me until my 50s to start really focusing on that. So you don't have to do it all right away, but if you ever want to be inspired, look up John Goddard. And by the way, you can update your goals too. You
Yeah. I'm
don't,
gonna ask
they
about
don't stay static forever.
that.
But having those goals, they will probably outdistance you to some extent forever, or at least you'll update them to come up with new and bigger goals.
Yeah.
But it really helps you think in terms of possibilities and
Yeah.
what you could do. And I mean, when people start thinking, oh, I'm too old, I'm too set in this career, how would I ever change? Write it down because you never know
Yeah.
until you set that goal how your mind might find ways to help you get there.
Wow.
And
So
I'm
good.
living proof of that, by the way. There were a lot of things I wrote down on my goal list that I had no idea how I would achieve.
And here you are. Yeah. That's so good. Okay. I have kind of I think it's a question that's going to bring it back full circle. I anticipate. But as we're talking about goals and rebalancing and making these shifts and just hearing your story, there is so much courage and boldness that's required for the surrender that it took to make the jump, right? To have these big shifts or leave something that felt really secure, or, sell your business or what have you. And I talk to women every day who hear parts of even my story, and they're like, man, I would love to quit this job, or I would love to do that, but I just I'm so scared, and we need the money, or my kids are, whatever it is, right? It's really easy, I think, for us to come up with excuses, and sometimes they're really good excuses.
Mhm.
But I also know that, I don't know, the more bold I've been, I feel like the more it's been rewarded. So that's
Yeah.
something I've just been leaning into and trusting.
Yep.
But for the women who they have the vision, and they're I know this is the next step, but I'm stuck in this fear, or this, I just can't bring myself to do it. What would you say to them, or how would you talk them through that?
Well, I would talk with them about why. Why do they want to make a change? And in any change, the pain of changing needs to be less than the pain of not changing, right? So it has to get to a point where you have to make the change.
Yeah.
But I think that even if it's something you'd like to do and you don't know how you would do that right now, when you start opening up your mind to the possibilities of doing it, make a 5-year plan.
Okay.
Think of one small thing you can do. I'll give you one example. I have a good friend who worked full time in an energy company and wanted to do coaching. And so she had a 980 work week, and her employer let her start coaching people on her Fridays that were off.
Wow.
And 5 years later, actually, it was less than 5 years, but she ended up moving into a full time coaching role. And maybe it's that you take a class. Maybe it's that you learn a skill, you connect with someone who's made that shift. One thing, just take the next step and think about one thing that might help you open up the possibilities
Yeah.
of making that change, and have a plan. And it doesn't have to be immediate, but you don't want to stay so busy in the here and now that you wake up one day and say, wow, 10 years have gone by and I've done nothing on this.
Yeah.
So I think it's being intentional that helps you start to open up to the possibilities of making that change in the future.
Yeah. I think that's really good. Just not letting it overwhelm you and then paralyze you by how big and scary it seems, but really
Yes.
breaking it down. Yeah. And not having the all or nothing, right? I think that's a
Yes.
good reminder. It's it doesn't have to be this job, or you just quit it altogether and start this new thing,
Right.
right? How can you figure out a way to do both?
And sometimes when people go through these values exercises, they realize that they're maybe at the right company, they're just not in the right role. I've had people that I've worked with who have negotiated their way into a different part of the business,
Wow.
into a different job there, so that they could get into something that was a little more aligned with their natural talents and their interests.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of different ways it can go, but the point is you got to start thinking creatively
Yes, I hear that.
about how to
Okay.
get there.
I want to talk about how people can continue to learn from you and connect with you. Obviously, the book, tell us a little bit about it. And then I know you mentioned that you have a new community that you're really
I
excited
do.
about. So would you tell us a little bit about that too?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the book is called The Rebalancing Act: Wisdom from Working Women for Success That Matters. And it's available everywhere you can buy books. And I'm excited about the book. It is a combination of my memoir, and then also it's a leadership book. It's based on 7 typical ways that women show up in the workplace. So we
Mhm.
found some archetypes from all the people we talked to of the ways we tend to show up at work. And then we found and we found out the traps that can result and talked through those, and then tips and techniques to get through those traps.
Very
So
cool.
it's a self-help book for women, but it's also my story about how I fell into those traps and got through them. So that's the book. And so rebalancing is my big word, as you can tell. And so I started a group, and right now it's just for women, but I've had some men who want to join. So we may open up a co-ed version, but it's called Rebalancing Revolution. It's virtual, so people can join from anywhere. It's working women, but they're in a variety of different roles. Some of them work corporate, some are entrepreneurs, some are working with their kids in the home and are not working for pay right now. But we support each other. We have guest speakers. We cover topics like last month it was about how to get organized, and we had a professional organizer teach us her method for getting organized. So it's once a month. It's just an hour-long meeting, but then we have a community in between those meetings. And so we support each other through that. And it's away from social media, and it's just a way to connect amazing women together and help support each other, particularly as we all aim to rebalance our lives.
Wow. Yeah. There's so much power in the community like that, right?
Yes,
Like-minded people.
it's really
Okay.
been
We
good.
will link all of that for you guys in the show notes. So you can just click and find and order the book. And the same thing with the community. Dan, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for, I think, giving us women who are trying to do so many things, just some like direction, like you said, and frameworks and tips, and even just like awareness and vision for what it could look like or where we're getting stuck and how to work through it. And thanks for being here and sharing your wisdom and your story with us today. It was such a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.